Thank you, Wendy, and welcome again to the webinar. And we're going through this in a line that I will first of all give some motivation on what are the challenges in distributed teams. We then look into the major risks and best practices, and I will zoom into some of the topics just to give an idea about what are these 9 success factors and how can we actually build upon them. You heard already about my background. I should add one aspect which helps a little bit in the understanding. My background before I joined Vector Consulting Service was on a global IT leader where we built a lot of these virtual teams. I built sites in India and China. And we learned already during that time in the late 90s about what it means to grow global teams into a real teamwork rather than just some ping pong exercise as we often see where people throw tasks across the fence and are later on disappointed if results would not fit. And certainly this long experience for a couple of aspects, namely also that there is a nice literature and book on best practices, which is global software and IT, which I recommend to those who want to get more background on the topic. Let me get started with what we all know from university and from school, which is what in project management is called the magic triangle. Now, the interesting part here is that this is from a very recent client survey, which we did over the past year. And what we can see from customers in very different industry domains is that there are 3 poles. If you go to the short-term challenge, what matters most is efficiency and cost. And that's normal because we are all in a global competition. If we go on the vertical scale, this is about what are the midterm challenges. And we see on one side, this is the middle of the picture, a lot of new innovative topics such as the digital transformation, connectivity, and not the least also an increasing amount of distribution. But at the same time, we also see that quality, specifically these days security and safety due to product liability, are the primary midterm challenge. So what does this picture tell us? Very clearly that we can take as much as possible resources on innovation, and we will certainly not be satisfied, but at the same time, in the short term, face a huge pressure on improving efficiency, which often tends to sacrifice quality, which is a long-term asset, which we sometimes also call the technical debt or the buried cost of what we will have to pay in the future due to insufficient quality. What I try to emphasize here is that it's possible to achieve efficiency in line with the necessary quality and innovation, but it means also to better use distributed teams and get the most efficiency out of these teams. Just to give you one number, which I think makes a lot of sense if we think about efficiency, is that typically distributed team, which is on about 2 to 3 sites, has about 30% of additional cost, which is typically not visible. If it is visible, that's mostly in situations just before such project crash. But there's overhead, and we should not close our eyes in front of that. Those who would still go only for cost reasons in distribution are typically not well advised because there are a lot of such hidden costs with respect to frictions, with respect to communication, with respect to a huge additional amount of process governance, etc. And these costs can be reduced. And if you talk here about a 30% with 2 or 3 sites, it means also that if we can cut out of this 30% overhead some 5 to 10 percentage points, then we have achieved already a big benefit. And this is what I put together in this webinar. So let us look into some of the motivation. And what you can see here is a picture which gives the frequency and the connectivity of certain highlights from the past 10 years of presentations in the IEEE conference on global software engineering. That's the leading flagship conference on the topic. Now, we did this longitudinal research just because the past 10 years, about from 2006 to 2015-16, is a timeline where we faced a lot of challenges. There was an economic crisis. There was a lot of shift in terms of distributed teams, preferred countries. There was a huge and fast evolution in terms of global markets with the individual setup. And so this 10 years are very representative also for today and also for the near future. Now, what we can see is that maturity of the research and industry experiences were shared in this IEEE conference seemingly have to do with teamwork, with topics such as collaboration, project management, communication, process, and that gives us already an idea which is where we will go from here, namely that we have to be operational efficient, we have to be continuously strive to operational excellence when we want to head and be successful in a distributed team. In other words, this is not so much about strategy and a lot of fancy topics. This is really groundwork of professional management, what we are going to talk about in this webinar. The reasoning on distributed teams and global development has moved over the past 20-30 years, certainly away from only looking to cost into much more flexibility. When I speak about flexibility, what I really mean is that we need to be continuously present in very different setup, follow the skills, as I call it, as opposed to follow the sun in the old days, and just-in-time networks which go beyond organizational boundaries. So we have ecosystems which go beyond company borders. We have supply chains which obviously go beyond these borders, but we have also what recently is called gig economy, which is that people more and more join for short term on a project with very specific skills, but would then also leave again. And that together is the key focus today if it comes to distributed teams. It is very different if I go to our studies, if we compare it with some 15 years ago, when we first started this kind of survey, when still in the late 90s, 2000, it was primarily about cost advantages. Number two is about innovation. And again, that's very obvious if we think about how do new products, how do new ideas go across. It's today to learn on a global market what are the user habits, what are the market needs, what are the evolution streams, what technologies, and to learn from these markets. If I go today in specific topics, be it in IT, be it in automotive, etc., I need to have a global perspective. It's not anymore sufficient to simply say, well, if I know the Silicon Valley, I know where is innovation heading. If I want to know about IT innovation, I need to be present in Shanghai. I need to be present in Shenzhen. I need to know what's going on in Singapore. I need to understand habits in London, in Europe, in many different places of the world. And we can also not anymore say there is this one clear innovation hub. Certain topics have their own hubs. I'm often in China, and what I realize is there are, even within China, hubs for specific technologies. And the same, of course, in United States. The same, of course, if we go into Europe. And that is, we need to be present, and I'm not talking about physical presence in terms of buildings and offices. This is things from yesterday. But we need to be present in terms of competencies, in terms of people who contribute and bring in these ideas and this market background from this globalized setup. That's what I call innovation here. Thirdly, it's about efficiency. And that's, of course, still competitiveness. I mean, we would be not so well advised if we think that cost has completely disappeared because we have this huge cost pressure. But what we also see is